Okay, this video is meant to be a continuation. We're going to pick up where we left off discussing time dimensions in research, specifically cohort studies. Cohort studies, rather than trend studies, are like a slideshow where you're looking at a particular group of people over time. Specifically, or for example, I should say, if I wanted to study the class of 2020, so those students who came to Ball State in 2016, and I wanted to look at their progress through their 4 years of education at Ball State, and then look further into whether or not they obtained a job within the field and how successful they were doing their job, all the way up to about 10 years after they left Ball State. What I could do is I could survey 500 students in 2016 from that freshman year class. I could have done that. And let's say I sample 500 out of 4,000. And I get information and so forth and so on. And then in 2017, I sample the same set of students. So now they're sophomores. However, I do not sample the exact same students. Everybody goes back into a hat, so to speak, and I draw out 500 names. Now, most of those names will not be those who I surveyed the previous year, but probably a few will be by chance. And then I carry out the exact same process over their third year, fourth year, and then every year 10 years after they left Ball State. So I'm still getting information from that particular cohort, the cohort of 2020, but I'm not following the exact same people through the years. I'm really just getting aggregate data on the cohort itself. This is how cohort studies and panel studies differ. Although their intentions are pretty much the same, panel studies follow the exact same people across time. So again, going back to the idea of looking at the class of 2020, I sample, let's make it more manageable, 50 students in the class of 2020, so when they were freshmen in 2016, and then I follow those specific 50 students across time, so through their years at Ball State and beyond. And maybe I might survey them, I may be interviewing them, and so forth and so on. That's the difference between a cohort study and a panel study. Now, panel study, it's pro to it. It gives you very specific information on specific people and you follow them through time. The problem with panel studies is attrition, in that when you start out with, say, 50 students, a lot of things can happen through, say, the 4 years of Ball State, namely students leaving, and then the years beyond Ball State with the inability to contact them. Maybe some, it's possible that a death is involved in the sample and so forth and so on, that you get quite a bit of attrition. And that once a 50-person sample, now 14 years later, looks like a, say, 18-person sample. So that's a big drawback of panel studies. That, and they're very expensive to complete. Of course, in the sciences of health, and we do have some panel studies in criminological research, they're just very expensive to complete, or to carry out, I should say. In a sense, they don't really ever, especially in the health realm, they don't really ever finish. They're following babies from their birth all the way through their life course. So you can imagine the expense that comes along with that. So now we have a fundamental understanding of our time dimensions in research. We go back to our assignment and we look here at some of our choices. In 2003, UCR violent crime comprised of murder and non-negligent homicide, forcible rape, robbery, and aggravated assault was at the level of 475 reported offenses per 100,000 population. This is a snapshot in time. This is telling you exactly what happened what the statistics were in 2003. So this is a cross-sectional study or a cross-sectional data. Number two, we look from 1999 to 2003. Again, the UCR, property crime rate per 100,000 persons dropped 4.1%, whereas in 2001, this rate was only 2.3%. So this is kind of depicting a trend. So it's B, trend data. 3, a survey of the study skills used by students was administered to a sample of Ball State freshmen. The following year, this survey was re-administered to a sample of students in their second year to examine changes in the types and or extent of study skills used. Just pretty much the same example we went over. This is, of course, a cohort study or cohort data. Number 4, beginning at age 12 and up through age 35, a group of research subjects was interviewed annually in an effort to better understand involvement in delinquency and crime prior to and then during the high crime years of the life course. This is, of course, D, panel study. And lastly, we look at newly hired police officers recently graduated from the academy were interviewed at 6-month intervals over the first 5 years of their careers in an effort to study the nature and prevalence of work-related cynicism. This is supposed to be panel data, D. It doesn't necessarily say that it was the exact same police officers, but by and large, you get the gist that this was panel data. So when we look at going back to the idea of, say, cross-sectional data, and then we pull up the PowerPoint again and go backwards, cross-sectional data is no use of time whatsoever. So I don't want you to be confused that if there are multiple years in, say, a sample, that you somehow have longitudinal data. You may, but if you aren't using time as an element of the research or as a variable of the research, then it's not longitudinal. So if we go back to the research article and we think about the sample, there were 824 drug court participants, and they participated in the program from 2008 to 2013. That's over a 6-year period. So it's possible that we can look at longitudinal, or the data as longitudinal. There are certain trends we could do with that data and so forth and so on. However, specifically in the research that you read about, the time element wasn't used. So you really don't factor in the time. That is still a cross-sectional study because time isn't a variable. In a sense, why I specifically collected 6 years of data wasn't to use time, but to increase my sample size. Somewhere in the neighborhood of 150 people participated in the drug court program every year. And we know here in methods that the larger the sample size, the better. So I had the opportunity to collect 6 years worth of data, which is of course better than 1. But I did not use time in that particular research. I could go back and use the same data and look at trends in sentencing or trends in completion rates and so forth and so on over time. And that's a thought for future research, but time is not an element there. So be careful when you are trying to evaluate what is cross-sectional and what has a time dimension to it. If it has a time dimension to it, it's actually using time as part of, say, the research question or as an independent variable within the research. So that's an important distinction. So that pretty much concludes the lecture on unit of analysis and dimensions of time and covering certain elements of the assignment. Now, I will post the answers and some explanations to the assignment on Blackboard. And if you are interested or you have questions on a topic where you think you may benefit from a short video like this, then please email me with a particular topic you'd like me to cover, and I will do my best to accommodate and put out a quick lecture video that hopefully will help you better understand whatever material you feel like you're having some difficulty with. Okay, thank you.